A suitcase hit the front porch and burst open. Clothes scattered across wet concrete, faded blouses, cotton underwear, a cardigan with missing buttons. All of it tumbling down the steps like something shameful being cast out of a body. A hand shoved hard between her shoulder blades. An old woman stumbled forward and caught the railing. Her fingers wrapped around the wood so tight her knuckles went white. Behind her, the front door slammed shut. A deadbolt turned. Then a chain slid into place. She stood there in a housecoat and slippers, breathing hard, staring at a door that used to be hers. 2 crumpled dollar bills sat in her palm. That was everything. No phone, no wallet, no keys, not a single photograph of her grandchildren, not a single piece of jewelry from her wedding day. Just $2 and whatever clothes had survived the fall. A car drove past. The driver glanced over, then looked away. A neighbor across the street pulled into her driveway, saw the old woman standing on the porch with her broken suitcase, and went inside without a word. Nobody stopped. Her name was Vivian Crestwood. She was 72 years old. She had raised 3 children behind that door. She had cooked 10,000 meals in that kitchen. She had folded laundry and scrubbed toilets and picked up grandchildren from school for 8 years without asking for a single thing in return. And her own son had just thrown her out like something expired. But here is what you need to understand about this woman. Vivian did not cry. She stood on that porch for a full minute, looking at the door. Her chest rose and fell. Her breath made small clouds in the cool Pennsylvania air. Then she bent down, stuffed whatever clothes she could grab back into the broken suitcase, and started walking. No plan, no destination. Just 1 foot in front of the other down a suburban street on a Tuesday afternoon in late October. What Vivian did in the next 48 hours did not just save her life. It cracked open a secret her mother had buried for half a century. A secret that would change everything she thought she knew about herself, about her family, and about the kind of love that waits in silence for decades, asking nothing, expecting nothing, until the exact moment it is needed most. Stay with me on this one. 6 weeks later, Vivian Crestwood stood in a county courthouse in upstate New York. The courtroom smelled like old wood and paper. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. 3 attorneys in expensive suits sat at a long table across from her, their faces arranged in expressions of professional contempt. The lead attorney, a man with silver hair and a watch that cost more than most cars, leaned forward and spoke directly to the judge. "Your Honor, this woman is a fraud. She appeared out of nowhere, broke into an abandoned property, and fabricated documents to claim an inheritance she has no legal right to. We ask that her claims be dismissed and that she be held accountable for what amounts to criminal trespass and attempted theft." Vivian sat very still in her chair. She wore a dress she had bought for $4 at a thrift store in town. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her back was straight. She did not flinch. The attorney continued. "Furthermore, we have filed a motion requesting that the court evaluate Mrs. Crestwood's mental competency. She is, by her own admission, a homeless woman with no verifiable identity, making outlandish claims about one of the most respected families in this county." Outlandish. That was the word he used. Vivian looked at him. She looked at all 3 of them. Then she looked at the judge. When she spoke, her voice was steady. The voice of a woman who had learned a long time ago how to take a hit without going down. "Your Honor, I have documents. I have records. I have a letter written by the man they claim I never knew. And I have the truth." The judge nodded slowly. "Then let's hear it, Mrs. Crestwood. From the beginning." 6 weeks earlier, the walk from the porch to the bus station was 11 blocks. Vivian's slippers were not made for that kind of walking. By block 4, her feet ached. By block 6, the left sole had peeled half off and was dragging against the pavement with every step. She passed houses she had walked by 1,000 times, lawns she had watched being mowed, driveways where she had seen children grow up and leave for college. None of it belonged to her. None of it ever had. She reached the bus station at 2:15. It was a small building with a metal bench out front and a root board behind dirty glass. She sat down and looked at the destinations. Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, New York City, and one more. A small town in upstate New York she had not thought about in decades. Carver Falls, population 800 and shrinking, 2 hours north of Albany, a place where the mountains folded in on themselves and the winters came early and stayed late. Vivian had grown up there. She had left when she was 18 years old, gotten on a bus just like this one, and never looked back. She went south, got married, had children, built a life that looked fine from the outside but was held together with silence and compromise and the kind of endurance that becomes invisible after enough years. She never went back to Carver Falls, not for holidays, not for funerals, not even when her mother died 34 years ago. Her mother, Harriet Pembroke. Harriet had passed alone in a cottage on the edge of town. Pneumonia, the death certificate said. Winter. No one found her for 3 days. By the time a neighbor checked, the fire had gone out and the cold had done its work. The funeral was small. A few people from town, a minister who did not know Harriet well but said kind things anyway. Vivian stood at the graveside with her husband Wallace and her 3 children and felt nothing but a strange hollow distance. She had not been close to her mother. There were reasons for that, reasons she had never fully examined, reasons that lived in the spaces between childhood memories like shadows in an empty room. After the funeral, a lawyer had read Harriet's will. It was brief and strange. Seal the cottage. Do not sell it. Do not rent it. Do not open it. Leave it exactly as it is until my daughter comes for it. Vivian had thought the instructions were eccentric, maybe even a sign of the confusion that sometimes came with age. But she had her own life by then, a husband who needed dinner on the table, 3 children in school, bills to pay, problems to solve. She told herself she would deal with the cottage someday. Someday never came. Until now, a Tuesday afternoon at a Greyhound station with $2 in her hand and nowhere else on this earth to go. The one-way ticket to the closest stop to Carver Falls cost $1.90. Vivian bought it. She had 10 cents left. She boarded the bus and found a seat in the back. She put the broken suitcase between her knees and folded her hands in her lap. The engine rumbled, the doors closed, and the bus pulled out of the station. 6 hours, no food, no water, no phone to call anyone, even if she had someone to call. The woman in the seat next to her fell asleep within 10 minutes. She was young, maybe 30, with headphones in her ears and a jacket pulled up to her chin. She did not look at Vivian. She did not offer conversation. She did not notice the old woman sitting beside her with torn slippers and bloody feet, and nothing in the world but a broken suitcase and 10 cents. Vivian did not expect her to. She was not the kind of person people noticed. She had made peace with that a long time ago. A man across the aisle unwrapped a sandwich, roast beef from the smell of it. He ate it in 4 bites and wiped his mouth with a napkin. He did not offer any. Vivian watched Pennsylvania flatten outside the window, then fold into the hills of New York. The towns got smaller. The spaces between them got wider. The trees turned from the faded green of late autumn to the bare gray of early winter. By the time the sun started going down, she could smell pine through a cracked window somewhere on the bus. Sharp and clean. Like something she had forgotten, she remembered. The bus pulled into a gas station on a 2-lane road outside Carver Falls just after 8 in the evening. Vivian stepped off into cold air. She had not been here since she was a teenager. Nothing looked familiar except the mountains. They rose in the distance like dark shoulders hunched against the sky. The same mountains she had watched from her bedroom window as a girl. The same mountains she had turned her back on when she left. The main street was half empty. Storefronts boarded up. A diner that had changed names 3 times. A hardware store with a faded sign that said it had been serving Carver Falls since 1952. She walked to the gas station and asked the clerk for directions. "I am looking for the old Pembroke property, the cottage out past the creek." The clerk was young, maybe 20. He shrugged and shook his head. "Never heard of it." A woman pumping gas overheard. She was older, with gray hair pulled back in a bun and hands that looked like they had worked hard for a long time. "Pembroke," she said. "You mean Harriet's place?" Vivian nodded. The woman studied her for a moment. Something in her eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or just curiosity. "You go east," she said. "Past the grain elevator. Past the old school. There is a gravel road that runs along the creek. Follow it until you cannot drive anymore. Then keep walking. You will see it." "Thank you." "That place has been sealed up for 30 years, the woman said. "Nobody goes out there." "I know," Vivian said. "I am going anyway." The walk took 40 minutes. her slippers shredded on the gravel. By the time she reached the creek, the left one was barely hanging on. By the time she turned down the narrow path through the overgrown field, both feet were bleeding. But she kept going because there was nowhere else on this planet for her to go. And then she saw it, past a rusted iron gate that had collapsed on one side, behind a field of weeds that came up past her waist. There it was, her mother's cottage. Small, stone foundation, wooden frame weathered gray by decades of mountain winters, a tin roof gone brown with rust, two windows in the front, both shuttered from the inside, a chimney that leaned slightly to the left, and the front door. The front door had 2x4s nailed across it in an X pattern, sealed, just like the will said. Vivian pushed through the broken gate. The weeds grabbed at her housecoat. Thorns scratched her legs. She did not stop. The porch steps groaned under her weight. One of them was rotted through. She stepped over it and stood at the front door, staring at those boards. They had been nailed there 34 years ago. She did not have a hammer. She did not have tools of any kind. But she found a loose piece of iron railing from the collapsed gate, heavy, rusted, about 2 feet long. She wedged it under the first board and pulled. The nails screamed against the wood. 20 minutes. That is how long it took. Her palms tore open. Blood ran down the iron railing and dripped onto the porch. Her shoulders burned. Her back ached. But one by one, the boards came free. She threw them into the weeds and stood there breathing hard, looking at the door behind them. It was old oak, solid, the kind of door they did not make anymore. She reached for the handle. It turned, unlocked. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. Now here is what she expected to find. Decay, mold, a collapsed ceiling, rats, the smell of rot and abandonment. That is what happens to a house that no one touches for 3 decades. That is what she had prepared herself for. But that is not what she found. She stopped just inside the doorway. The air was cool and still, dry. No mildew smell, no animal droppings, no cobwebs. The furniture was covered in white sheets. They hung over chairs and tables like ghosts standing guard in every room. Pale shapes in the darkness. Vivian walked to the nearest one and pulled. The sheet came away in her hands. Underneath was a wooden rocking chair. Clean, no dust, no rot. The varnish still gleamed faintly in the last light coming through the open door. She pulled off another sheet. The kitchen table, polished maple, intact, not a scratch on it. She ran her hand across the surface. Wax. Someone had waxed this table before covering it. She walked into the kitchen. Her footsteps echoed against the wooden floor. She opened a cabinet. Jars, dozens of them, lined up on the shelves, preserves, pickled beets, green beans, sealed tight with wax, labels in her mother's careful handwriting. Peaches, 1989. Applesauce, 1990. Tomatoes, 1991. The year her mother died. She opened another cabinet. Dishes stacked neatly, glasses without a single crack. A cast iron skillet hanging from a nail still seasoned black. She opened the drawer by the sink. Her mother's kitchen scissors were right where they had always been. Right where Vivian remembered them from 40 years ago. The whole cottage looked like someone had walked out yesterday, not 34 years ago. The walls had not sagged. The floor had not buckled. The stone foundation had held everything together like a closed fist. It made no sense, but it was real. And Vivian was not about to question a miracle. She stood in the middle of her dead mother's kitchen and felt something she had not felt in 8 years, maybe longer. Safe. The word came to her like a stranger knocking on a door she had forgotten existed. Safe. The cottage was solid. The roof did not leak. The well pump out back still worked when she primed it. Cold water came up from the earth, clear and clean. She found a tin cup on the counter. It had sat in the same spot since she was a girl. She filled it and drank. The water tasted like childhood, like summer mornings and bare feet on cool floors, and the smell of her mother making breakfast before dawn. She sat at the kitchen table, and she just breathed, for the first time since Wallace died, for the first time since the bank took the house, for the first time since she moved into her son's spare room and learned how small a person could make themselves. She was not in anyone's way. She was not asking permission to exist. She was not waiting to be told to leave. She found blankets in a cedar chest in the corner of the bedroom. They smelled like lavender and old wood. She made a bed on the couch in the front room. She opened one of the jars from the shelf. Peaches, 34 years in a sealed jar. They were still sweet. She ate them with her fingers, the syrup running down her chin, and she did not care. Then she laid down on the couch, pulled the blanket up to her chin, and closed her eyes. She slept deeper than she had in a decade. The kind of sleep where you do not dream because your body finally trusts where it is. When she woke, sunlight was cutting through the gaps in the shutters. Thin golden lines across the floor. Dust motes floating in the light like tiny worlds suspended in amber. She got up slowly. Her body ached. Her hands throbbed where the iron railing had torn them open. But she felt something else too. Something underneath the pain. Alive. She felt alive. She walked to the windows and opened the shutters one by one. Each one protested with a creak of old hinges. But they opened, and the cottage filled with warm gold light. She stood in the middle of the room and looked around. This was her mother's home. These were her mother's things. This was the life Harriet Pembroke had lived alone for decades, while Vivian was busy with her own family, her own problems, her own reasons for never coming back. And now Vivian was here, alone, in the place her mother had sealed away like a time capsule. She walked to the fireplace. The mantel above it was covered with a thin layer of dust. Not much, just enough to show that some things could not be stopped even in a sealed house. There were photographs and frames, small ones, black and white. Vivian as a baby, Vivian as a girl. Vivian in a dress on the day of her high school graduation. Her mother had kept them all. And behind one of the frames, half hidden in shadow, was something else. An envelope. Vivian reached for it, yellowed with age, sealed with red wax. Her name written on the front in her mother's careful handwriting. Vivian. Just that. Nothing else. She held it in her hands for a long time. The paper was soft with age. The wax seal unbroken. Her mother had written this. Her mother had sealed it. Her mother had placed it here, behind a photograph, and waited. Waited for what? Waited for who? Vivian broke the wax. She opened the envelope and pulled out the letter inside. 2 pages. Thin paper, the handwriting steady and clear. The first 3 words stopped her heart. I knew you would come. She read them again. I knew you would come. Her mother had known. Somehow across decades, across silence, across all the distance Vivian had put between them, Harriet had known that someday her daughter would need this place, would need to come home. Vivian sat down in the rocking chair by the fireplace. The same chair her mother had sat in, the same chair Vivian had seen her in as a child, watching the fire, saying nothing, keeping secrets Vivian had never thought to ask about. She read the letter. I knew you would come. I do not know when. I do not know what will bring you here. But I know you will come because I know the world, and I know what the world does to women like us. Women who give too much. Women who ask for too little. Women who learn to be small so that others can feel big. You learned that from me. I am sorry for that. I taught you silence when I should have taught you to speak. I taught you endurance when I should have taught you to fight, but I have left you something. Something the world cannot take away. Go to the cellar. The lock combination is your birthday. Month, day, year, open the door. Everything you need is below. Vivian read the letter again, then a third time. Her hands were shaking. She looked up from the page and stared at the room around her. The sealed cottage, the preserved furniture, the jars of food on the shelves. Her mother had planned this. Not just sealed the house, planned it, prepared it, left instructions for her. She got up from the chair. Her legs felt unsteady beneath her. She walked through the cottage looking for the cellar door. It was not in the kitchen, not in the hallway, not in the small bedroom where her mother had slept alone for all those years. She found it in the pantry, under a braided rug she remembered from childhood. A rug her mother had made by hand, weaving scraps of fabric together in patterns of red and blue and gold. Vivian pulled the rug aside. Beneath it was a hatch, heavy oak, iron hinges, and a padlock, old brass, solid, the kind of lock that would last 100 years. She knelt down and looked at the dial. 3 numbers. Her birthday. October 14th, 1953. She turned the dial. 10, 14, 53. The lock clicked open on the first try. She lifted the hatch. Below was darkness, a wooden staircase descending into the earth. The smell of cool air and cedar and something else. Paper, maybe. Old paper. She should have been afraid. She was not. She had walked 11 blocks on bleeding feet. She had ridden a bus for 6 hours with nothing to eat. She had pried boards from a sealed door with her bare hands. She was done being afraid. She descended into the cellar. The stairs creaked beneath her weight. The darkness wrapped around her. She reached the bottom and stood still, letting her eyes adjust. Then she saw it, and everything changed. But before we go there, you need to understand how Vivian ended up on that porch with $2 in a broken suitcase. You need to understand how a woman who had spent her entire life taking care of others ended up with nothing. You need to understand the betrayal. 8 years earlier, Wallace Crestwood died. He dropped dead in the garage on a Saturday morning in March while changing the oil in his truck. Heart attack, massive. The doctor said he was probably gone before he hit the concrete. Vivian found him an hour later. She had called him for lunch. When he did not answer, she walked out to the garage and saw him lying there. Eyes open, face gray, one hand still holding a wrench. She did not scream. She did not collapse. She knelt beside him, put her hand on his chest, and felt nothing. No heartbeat, no breath, just stillness. Then she went inside and called 911. The funeral was 3 days later. All 3 children came. Gerald, the oldest, Patricia, the middle child, and Thomas, the youngest. They stood beside their mother at the graveside and said the things people say. He was a good man. He worked hard. He loved his family. All of it true. All of it incomplete. Because here is what no one said at the funeral. Wallace Crestwood had been terrible with money. Not dishonest, not greedy, just careless. The kind of man who believed things would work out because they always had before. The kind of man who signed papers without reading them and trusted people he should not have trusted and never once looked at the bank statements because that was not how he had been raised. He handled the money. All of it. The bills, the taxes, the savings. Everything went through Wallace. And when the dust settled after the funeral, Vivian found out there was no money to handle. The house had a second mortgage she did not know about. Credit cards she had never seen. Debts going back years. Wallace had been juggling them, moving money from one account to another, making minimum payments, telling himself he would fix it next month. Next month never came. Within 6 months, the bank took the house. The car followed, then the furniture. Vivian walked out of that foreclosure with 2 suitcases and a box of photo albums. That was it. 42 years of marriage. 42 years of building a life. And she walked away with 2 suitcases and a box of photographs. Her son Gerald said she could move in with him and his wife Marlene. Gerald said it like it was the most natural thing in the world. His mother needed a place. He had a spare room. Done. And for a while it worked. Vivian cooked. She cleaned. She picked up the grandchildren from school and helped them with homework. She made herself useful because she understood the deal. You live in someone else's house. You earn your keep. You stay quiet. You take up as little space as possible. Vivian had spent a lifetime learning how to do exactly that. She had learned it from her marriage, from her childhood, from her mother who had never talked about her own struggles but had lived them every single day. Silence, endurance, invisibility. These were the tools Vivian knew. And for 8 years she used them. But over those 8 years, the math changed. The grandchildren grew up. They got their driver's licenses. They got their own phones, their own friends, their own schedules that did not include a grandmother sitting in the living room watching game shows. The house felt smaller than it used to, and Marlene started talking. Little comments at first, the kind that could be dismissed as nothing. A sigh about the water bill, a remark about grocery costs, a question about whether Vivian really needed to take such long showers. Vivian heard every single word. She just never responded. Because what could she say? She had nothing, no money, no home, no way to support herself. She was 70 years old and dependent on her son's charity. And charity, she had learned, always came with a price. By year 7, the comments were not little anymore. Marlene talked about renovations, a new kitchen, a finished basement, a deck out back, big projects, expensive projects, projects that required money Gerald did not have as long as there was a third adult in the house eating through the budget. That was how Marlene phrased it. A third adult eating through the budget, as if Vivian were some kind of parasite, some burden that had attached itself to the family and could not be removed. The conversations happened at night, behind the closed bedroom door. But the walls were thin and Vivian's room was right next to theirs. She heard everything. She heard Marlene say the house was too crowded. She heard Marlene say they could not afford a new roof with Vivian there. She heard Marlene say it was time to look at facilities, senior living, assisted care, somewhere with people her own age. And she heard Gerald. Gerald never raised his voice, not once. Gerald never argued. Gerald never defended his mother. He just let Marlene talk until she was done. And then he agreed. The morning it happened was a Tuesday, October, cold. The kind of morning where the air has a bite to it and the leaves on the trees are starting to let go. Vivian was sitting at the kitchen table eating toast. Plain toast with a little butter. She had learned to eat simple things. Things that did not cost much. Things that did not draw attention. Marlene walked in. She was dressed for work. Blazer, slacks, her hair pulled back tight. She put both hands flat on the counter and looked at Vivian. "We need to talk." Vivian set down her toast. "I have been looking at some options," Marlene said. "Senior living, assisted care. There are some nice places, clean, safe. You would have people your own age to talk to." She pushed a stack of brochures across the table. Vivian looked at them, did not touch them. "The timeline is the end of the month," Marlene said. "That gives you 3 weeks to get your things together. Gerald and I will help you move." Vivian looked at Gerald. He was standing by the coffee maker with his back turned. He did not move. He did not speak. "I understand," Vivian said. She got up from the table, left her toast half-eaten, went to her room. She started packing. It did not take long. She did not have much, a few clothes, a few books, a photograph of Wallace from when they were young. Everything else was gone. Sold. Foreclosed. Lost. She was folding a sweater when Marlene appeared in the doorway. "There has been a change," Marlene said. "A friend of mine called. There is an opening at one of the facilities. Today, right now, they need an answer." Vivian looked up. "You said the end of the month." "Plans change." Gerald was standing behind Marlene, hands in his pockets, eyes on the floor. "I just need one more day," Vivian said, "to get my things in order, to say goodbye to the children." "They're at school," Marlene said, "and one more day won't change anything." She stepped into the room, picked up the suitcase Vivian had been packing, carried it to the front door, opened the door, dropped the suitcase on the porch. The latch broke. The suitcase popped open. Clothes spilled across the concrete. Vivian followed, stood in the doorway. "Marlene." "You should go," Marlene said. "The facility is expecting you." "I have no way to get there. I have no money. I have nothing." Marlene reached into her pocket, pulled out 2 crumpled bills. "For the bus," she said. "They have a shuttle from the station." Vivian took the money, $2. She looked at Gerald one more time. He was standing in the hallway, still not looking at her, still not speaking. "Gerald," she said, "please." He did not answer. Marlene put a hand on Vivian's shoulder, not gentle, firm, and pushed. Vivian stumbled forward, caught the railing, felt the cold air hit her face. Behind her, the door closed. The deadbolt turned. The chain slid into place. And Vivian Crestwood stood on the porch of her son's house with a broken suitcase and $2 and nowhere in the world to go. She did not cry. She had cried enough tears in her life. Cried for Wallace. Cried for the house. Cried for the life she had lost piece by piece over 8 years. Crying was not in the toolbox anymore. What was in the toolbox was something older, something harder, something her mother had taught her without ever saying a word. Endurance. You get knocked down, you get back up, you keep walking. Vivian picked up her clothes, stuffed them back into the broken suitcase, held it closed with one hand because the latch was gone, and she started walking. 11 blocks to the bus station. $1.90 for a ticket to somewhere she had not been in 54 years. 10 cents left over. A 6-hour ride through the darkening countryside. A walk down a gravel road with bleeding feet. A sealed cottage waiting in the darkness. And a letter that began with 3 words. "I knew you would come." Now Vivian stood at the bottom of the cellar stairs looking at what her mother had left behind. She could not see clearly in the darkness, but she could see enough. Shapes, boxes, shelves lining the walls. She needed light. She climbed back up the stairs and searched the cottage. In a drawer by the back door, she found what she was looking for. A kerosene lantern. Old. Dusty. But when she shook it, she could hear liquid sloshing inside. Beside the lantern was a box of matches. Strike anywhere. The kind her mother had always kept. She lit the lantern. The flame caught, steadied, cast a warm orange glow. She carried it down into the cellar, and she saw. The cellar was not a cellar. It was an archive. Shelves along every wall, not jars of food, not old tools. Documents. Boxes of them. Manila folders, leather binders, a filing system that looked like it belonged in a law office, not under a farmhouse in upstate New York. Each box was labeled in her mother's handwriting. Land, trust, taxes, legal, personal, block letters, clear, precise. Each box sealed with packing tape that had yellowed but held firm. Vivian set the lantern on a wooden table in the center of the room. The light flickered against the stone walls. Shadows danced. She reached for the first box. Land. She carried it to the table, set it down, used her fingernail to break the tape. Inside were documents, thick paper, official seals, the kind of paper that meant something. She pulled out the first one. A deed. Not for the cottage, not for the quarter-acre plot the house sat on. This deed was for 42 acres of surrounding land, fields to the north, forest to the west, creek frontage along the entire eastern boundary, all of it in her mother's name, Harriet Pembroke, all of it legally recorded and notarized at the county clerk's office. Vivian stared at the document. Her mother had owned 42 acres of land. She had never said a word. Vivian reached deeper into the box. More deeds, tax records, payment receipts going back decades. The property taxes had been paid every single year, right up through 2027. Someone had been making those payments, quietly, faithfully, for 34 years after Harriet died. Vivian set the box aside and reached for the next one. Trust. Inside were bank statements. A trust account opened in 1971, initial deposit of $5,000, monthly contributions after that. Small at first, $25, $50, then larger. $200 a month by the 80s, $500 by the 90s. The statements went all the way up to 6 months ago. The current balance made Vivian sit down on the cold stone floor of the cellar. $412,000. Interest had compounded. Dividends had reinvested. The money had sat there growing quietly like a tree. Nobody was watching. For over 50 years. Vivian's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the paper. 24 hours ago, she had been standing on a porch with 2 crumpled bills and nowhere to go. Her own son had thrown her out. She had ridden a bus with no food and walked on bleeding feet to a house she thought was abandoned. And underneath her mother's kitchen floor, sealed behind a combination lock only she could open, was more than $400,000 and 42 acres of land. But the money was not even the biggest shock. There was a third box, smaller than the others, wrapped in cloth, no label. Vivian unwrapped it carefully, her hands still trembling, her breath coming fast. Inside was a single document in a protective plastic sleeve. A birth certificate. Her birth certificate. But not the one she had grown up with. Not the one that listed Harold Hayes as her father. Harold Hayes, the man who drank too much and yelled too much and broke things when he was angry and walked out when Vivian was 7 years old without a word or a forwarding address. This certificate had been issued by a different county, and the father line read something else entirely. Sterling Wentworth. Vivian set the document down on the table and stepped back from it like it was something hot. Sterling Wentworth. She knew that name. Everyone in Carver Falls knew that name. The Wentworth family had owned the largest dairy operation in the county for 3 generations. They had built the town library. They had funded the fire department. Their name was on the hospital wing and the elementary school gymnasium and the bronze plaque in the town square. Sterling Wentworth had been the patriarch. Old money, church every Sunday. A man whose handshake could get a loan approved or a road paved. He had died in 1992. His obituary ran on the front page of 3 newspapers, and according to this birth certificate, he was Vivian's father. She picked up her mother's letter again, turned to page 2. The handwriting was still steady, still clear, but the words were different now, heavier. Sterling and I were together for 2 years before you were born. He was already married. He had a family, a name to protect. When I told him I was pregnant, he offered to pay. I said no. He offered to take you and raise you as his own. I said no to that too. I was not going to let my daughter grow up as someone's secret, as something to be hidden, as a mistake that needed to be managed. He did not push. He was not that kind of man. But he set up the trust. He bought the surrounding land and put it in my name. He said it was for you when the time came. I sealed the cottage because I did not trust his family. If they found out about you after I was gone, they would have taken the land. They would have challenged the trust. They would have buried the truth. So I buried it first, in a place only you could find. Vivian read that paragraph 5 times. She read it standing up. She read it sitting down. She read it once more with her hands pressed flat on the table to keep them from shaking. 72 years. She had spent 72 years believing she was the daughter of Harold Hayes, a drunk, a failure, a man who had abandoned his family without a second thought. That story had shaped everything: her tolerance for bad situations, her silence in rooms where she should have spoken, her willingness to be small, to shrink, to accept whatever space other people decided to give her. Harold Hayes was a ghost that had haunted every decision she had ever made. And now, sitting in her mother's cellar in a sealed cottage, in a town she had run from at 18, she learned he was not her father at all. The lie was not cruel. It was a wall her mother had built around her, and it had held for half a century. But here is the thing you need to understand. The Wentworth family was still in Carver Falls. Sterling was dead, but his legitimate children were alive and active. 2 sons, 1 daughter. They ran what was left of the dairy and had expanded into real estate development. They were wealthy. They were powerful. They were used to getting what they wanted. And according to the documents in a 4th box, they had been trying to buy the land around the cottage for years. Letters, purchase offers, sent to the estate of Harriet Pembroke. Polite at first, then aggressive, then written by lawyers using words like eminent domain and adverse possession. All of them unanswered. All of them returned to sender by a post office that had no forwarding address. The Wentworths did not know Vivian existed. They did not know the land had a living heir. They thought they were dealing with a dead woman's unclaimed property, and they had been circling it like patient animals for decades, waiting for it to default into county hands where they could buy it for nothing. Vivian climbed out of the cellar as the sun was setting. She sat at her mother's kitchen table with everything spread in front of her: the deeds, the trust statements, the birth certificate, the letters from the Wentworths, her mother's letter with its 3 impossible words. I knew you would come. She had 2 choices. She could take the money, sell the land quietly, disappear into a comfortable retirement somewhere no one would bother her. Or she could do what her mother never did. She could walk into town, find a lawyer, and claim her name. She did not sleep that night. She sat in her mother's rocking chair by the fireplace and thought about Harriet, about what it must have cost to keep that secret for so many years, about the discipline it took to seal a house and trust that someday, decades later, the right person would open it, about love, the kind of love that does not announce itself, that does not ask for recognition, that simply builds something in silence and waits for the moment it will be needed. Her mother had loved her, not with words, not with warmth, not in any of the ways Vivian had wanted as a child, but with planning, with preparation, with a faith so deep it outlasted death itself. By morning, Vivian had made her decision. She was going to claim it, all of it, the land, the trust, the name, and God help anyone who tried to stop her. The morning after Vivian made her decision, she woke before dawn. The cottage was cold. The fire had burned down to embers overnight. Gray light crept through the windows like something uncertain of its welcome. She lay on the couch for a long moment, staring at the ceiling. The same ceiling her mother had stared at for decades. The same wooden beams. The same shadows in the corners. Everything was different now. Everything and nothing. She was still 72 years old. Still alone. Still a woman who had been thrown out of her son's house with $2 and a broken suitcase. But she was also something else now. She was the daughter of Sterling Wentworth. She was the owner of 42 acres of land. She was the beneficiary of a trust worth more than $400,000. And she was about to walk into town and announce all of it to a world that had never noticed her existence. Vivian got up from the couch. Her body ached. Her hands were still raw from prying the boards off the door. Her feet were scabbed over where the gravel had torn them open. But pain was just information. That was something else her mother had taught her without ever saying a word. Pain tells you that you are still alive. Pain tells you that you are still fighting. Pain is not the enemy. Giving up is the enemy. She went to the kitchen and opened one of the jars on the shelf. Green beans, canned in 1989. She ate them cold, standing at the counter, watching the light grow stronger outside the window. Then she went to the pump and filled a basin with water. She washed her face, her hands, her arms. The water was cold enough to make her gasp, but she did not stop. She found clothes in the cedar chest. Her mother's clothes. Old but clean, a wool skirt, a cotton blouse, a cardigan that smelled like lavender and thyme. They fit. Not perfectly, but well enough. Vivian looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand. A stranger looked back. An old woman in old clothes in an old house. But the eyes were the same. The jaw was the same. The stubborn set of the mouth was the same. She was still herself. And she was ready. The walk into town took almost an hour. Vivian had found a pair of boots in the closet by the back door. Her mother's boots. Worn leather, sturdy soles. They were a half size too big, but she stuffed newspaper in the toes and they held. The gravel road was easier in daylight. She could see the ruts to avoid, the patches of mud to step around. The creek ran alongside her, catching the morning light, making small sounds over the rocks. Birds sang in the trees. A hawk circled overhead. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks already dusted with the first snow of the season. It was beautiful. Vivian had forgotten how beautiful it was. She had spent 54 years in Pennsylvania in suburbs, in small cities, in houses with lawns that needed mowing and driveways that needed shoveling. She had forgotten what it felt like to walk through a landscape that had not been tamed. That did not care whether you existed or not. That simply was. She reached the main street of Carver Falls just after 9 in the morning. The town looked different in daylight than it had the night she arrived. Still half empty, still faded, but there were signs of life. A coffee shop with lights on inside, a hardware store with a truck parked out front, an old man walking a dog along the sidewalk. Vivian walked past them all. She was looking for something specific, a lawyer's office. She had found a business card in her mother's documents, old and soft at the edges. The print faded but still legible. Finch and Associates, attorneys at law, established 1952. The address was on Main Street, number 114. She found it 3 blocks from the coffee shop. A converted house with a small sign out front, white paint peeling from the porch rails, a brass knocker on the door shaped like a lion's head. Vivian climbed the steps. She knocked. A moment passed, then another. She was about to knock again when the door opened. A woman stood there, middle-aged, gray streaks in her brown hair, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. "Can I help you?" "I am looking for the attorney," Vivian said. "I have some documents I need help with." The woman looked at her, took in the old clothes, the worn boots, the box of papers under her arm. "Do you have an appointment?" "No." "Mr. Finch is quite busy. Perhaps if you came back tomorrow, I could—" "I am the daughter of Harriet Pembroke," Vivian said, "and I need to speak to whoever handled her estate." The woman stopped. Something changed in her face. Recognition, maybe, or surprise. "Wait here," she said. "Please." She disappeared into the house. Vivian stood on the porch holding her box of documents, listening to the sounds of the town around her. A car starting somewhere down the street. A dog barking. The wind moving through the trees. The door opened again. A man stood there this time. Mid-50s. Gray at the temples. Wire-rimmed glasses. Hands that looked like they spent more time holding books than tools. He looked at Vivian for a long moment. Then he said something she did not expect. "My God, you look just like her." Vivian did not know what to say. I am Barrett Finch, the man said. Please, come inside. The office was small but tidy. Bookshelves lined the walls, law books mostly their spines cracked with use. A desk sat by the window covered with papers and folders. Two leather chairs faced each other in front of a cold fireplace. Barrett gestured for Vivian to sit. She did. Set the box on the floor beside her, kept her hands folded in her lap. Barrett sat in the other chair. He did not go behind the desk. He sat across from her like an equal, like someone who wanted to have a conversation, not a consultation. You said you are Harriet's daughter, he said. Yes. Vivian. Yes, he nodded slowly. My father told me about you before he died. Your father, Barrett Finch Sr., he was the original Finch in Finch and Associates. He started this practice in 1952. He handled your mother's affairs for over 40 years. Vivian felt something shift inside her, a piece falling into place. The trust, she said, the tax payments on the land, that was him. Yes, he set it all up, per your mother's instructions and per the instructions of another party. Sterling Wentworth. Barrett's eyebrows rose slightly. You know, I found the birth certificate in the cellar, along with everything else. She reached down and lifted the box onto her lap, opened it, showed him the deeds, the trust statements, the birth certificate in its protective sleeve. Barrett took each document carefully, examined them. His expression did not change, but his hands moved with a kind of reverence, like he was handling something sacred. These are authentic, he said. I recognize my father's notarization on several of them. I need to know what to do, Vivian said. I need to know how to claim what my mother left me. Barrett set the documents down. Mrs. Crestwood, may I be direct with you, please? My father told me before he passed that someday someone would come for this file. He did not know when, he did not know under what circumstances, but he was certain it would happen. Barrett stood, walked to a cabinet in the corner, unlocked it with a key from his pocket. He pulled out a folder. Thick, dog-eared, the kind of folder that had been opened and closed hundreds of times over many years. This is your mother's file, he said. I have been maintaining it since my father retired in 1995, paying the property taxes from the trust account, responding to inquiries about the land, keeping everything in order. Responding to inquiries. Barrett sat back down, opened the folder. The Wentworth family has been trying to acquire your mother's land for over 20 years. Letters, offers, legal pressure. They believe the property belongs to an estate with no living heirs. They have been waiting for it to revert to the county so they can purchase it. But there is a living heir, Vivian said. Yes, there is. Barrett looked at her. His eyes were serious behind the wire-rimmed glasses. Mrs. Crestwood, I need you to understand something. If you pursue this claim, you will be going up against one of the most powerful families in this county. The Wentworths have money. They have lawyers. They have connections that go back generations. I understand. They will fight you. They will challenge every document. They will question your identity, your sanity, your right to exist. They will try to bury you. Vivian thought about the porch, the broken suitcase, the $2 in her palm. She thought about Gerald standing in the hallway with his eyes on the floor. She thought about all the years she had spent being quiet, being small, being invisible. Let them try, she said. Barrett studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled, just slightly, just enough to crease the corners of his eyes. My father said you would say that. He said Harriet's daughter would have her mother's spine. What do I need to do? First, we establish your identity. The birth certificate is a start, but we will need supporting documentation. Medical records if we can find them. Witness testimony if anyone is still alive who remembers your mother's pregnancy. And then we file paperwork to establish you as the rightful heir to the land, the cottage, and the trust. The birth certificate, once authenticated by the state, gives you a legal claim. Your mother's will, which I have here in my files, names you as sole beneficiary. He pulled another document from the folder. This will was sealed after your mother's death per her instructions. I have never opened it, but I believe it contains additional information that will support your claim. Vivian looked at the sealed envelope, her mother's handwriting on the front, to be opened only by my daughter. There is one more thing, Barrett said. He reached deeper into the folder, pulled out another envelope. This one was older, the paper yellowed, the seal unbroken. This letter was given to my father in 1988. It was written by Sterling Wentworth himself. My father was instructed to keep it with your mother's file to be produced only if her heir came forward to claim the estate. Vivian stared at the envelope. What does it say? I do not know. I have never opened it. But my father told me it was important. He said it was Sterling's way of protecting you even after he was gone. Barrett held the envelope out to her. This belongs to you now, along with everything else. Vivian took it. The paper was soft with age. Sterling Wentworth's name was written in the corner. The handwriting was different from her mother's. Bolder, more angular. She did not open it. Not yet. What happens now, she asked. Now I file the paperwork. It will take time. Several weeks probably. The county will need to verify everything. The state will need to authenticate the birth certificate. But if all the documents are in order, and I believe they are, you will be recognized as the legal owner of everything your mother left you. And the Wentworths, Barrett's expression sobered. They will find out. As soon as the filings hit the county records, they will know, and they will respond. How? I do not know, but I know it will not be pleasant. Vivian tucked the envelope into the box with the other documents. Then we had better be ready, she said. The legal process took 5 weeks. 5 weeks of paperwork. 5 weeks of waiting. 5 weeks of living in the cottage on canned food and well water, while Barrett Finch filed motions and gathered evidence and built a case that would stand up to whatever the Wentworths threw at it. Vivian did not mind the waiting. For the first time in 8 years, she had something to wait for. She spent the days cleaning the cottage, airing out the rooms, opening windows that had been sealed for 3 decades, letting the mountain air sweep through the rooms and carry away the mustiness of years. She worked in the garden. It had gone wild during the decades of neglect. Weeds choked the vegetable beds. Brambles had overtaken the berry bushes. But underneath the chaos, the bones were still good. The raised beds her mother had built from stone. The fence post that kept out the deer. The compost bin in the corner that had turned to rich black soil over the years. Vivian cleared. She weeded. She turned the soil with a shovel she found in the shed. Her hands blistered and then calloused. Her back ached at the end of each day. But it was good pain. Productive pain. The kind of pain that meant something was growing. She found seeds in a tin in the pantry. Old seeds, but seeds kept cool and dry can last for decades. She planted them anyway. Lettuce, spinach, radishes, things that would grow fast even in the cooling weather. 2 weeks after she planted them, green shoots appeared. Life pushing up through the soil, it felt like a sign. At night, she read her mother's letters. There were more of them in the cellar. A whole box labeled personal. Letters Harriet had written but never sent. Letters to Vivian, mostly. Letters that said all the things Harriet had never been able to say out loud. I think about you every day. I wonder if I made the right choice. I wonder if you hate me for being so cold. I did not know how to be warm. I did not know how to be soft. I only knew how to survive. I loved you. I love you still. I hope someday you will understand. Vivian read them by candlelight. She cried sometimes, not from sadness, from grief maybe, from the weight of all those unspoken words finally being spoken. Her mother had loved her, in her own way, in the only way she knew how. It was not the love Vivian had wanted as a child, but it was love, real and fierce and enduring. The kind of love that builds a fortress in secret and waits decades for the moment it will be needed. The kind of love that says, I knew you would come. The filings hit the county records on a Thursday in late November. Barrett called her that afternoon. It is done, he said. The paperwork is filed. The state has authenticated the birth certificate. Your mother's will has been unsealed and entered into the record. You are now officially recognized as the sole heir to the Pembroke estate. Vivian sat down at the kitchen table. What happens now? Now we wait. The trust account will be released to your control within 10 business days. The land deeds will be transferred to your name. You will receive official documentation of everything. And the Wentworths, a pause on the other end of the line. They know, Barrett said. I received a call this morning from a law firm in Albany. They represent the Wentworth family. They ask questions about the filings. What kind of questions? The kind of questions people ask when they are preparing to fight. Vivian looked out the window. The mountains were white with snow now. The sky was gray and heavy. "Let them come," she said. They came faster than she expected. 2 weeks after the filings, Barrett called again. His voice was different this time, tighter, controlled in a way that suggested he was working to stay calm. "They have filed a challenge," he said. "3 attorneys from a firm in Albany, Harrington, Cole, and Price. They are one of the most aggressive litigation firms in the state." "What are they challenging?" "Everything. The authenticity of the deeds, the validity of the trust, the legitimacy of the birth certificate. They are claiming that your mother forged the documents, that she manipulated Sterling Wentworth into giving her money and land under false pretenses." Vivian felt something cold move through her chest. "That is not true. I know it is not true, but they do not need to prove it is true. They only need to create enough doubt to delay the process, to force us into a prolonged legal battle, to wear you down." "What else?" Another pause. Longer this time. "They have filed a motion to have you declared mentally incompetent." The words hit her like a physical blow. "On what grounds?" "They are claiming that you are a homeless woman with no verifiable identity who broke into an abandoned property and fabricated documents to support a fraudulent inheritance claim. They are asking the court to freeze the trust and appoint a conservator to manage the estate until your mental fitness can be evaluated." Vivian stood up from the table. Her legs felt unsteady. She walked to the window and looked out at the snow-covered mountains. "They are trying to take everything," she said. "Yes. They are trying to make me disappear." "Yes." Vivian pressed her palm against the cold glass. She thought about Gerald, about Marlene, about the morning on the porch with the broken suitcase. She thought about all the times in her life she had been pushed aside, dismissed, made to feel small. "What do we do?" she asked. "We fight," Barrett said. "We respond to every motion. We counter every claim. We produce evidence that proves the documents are authentic. We bring in experts, handwriting analysts, financial auditors, whatever it takes. Can we win? I believe we can, but it will not be easy, and it will not be quick. This could take months, maybe longer." Vivian turned away from the window. "I have time," she said. "I have nothing but time." The next 3 weeks were the hardest of Vivian's life. The trust was frozen. She could not access the money. Every cent was locked away while the legal battle played out. She lived on what the cottage provided. Canned food from the cellar. Vegetables from the garden that had somehow survived the early frost. Water from the well. Heat from the fireplace burning wood she chopped herself from fallen branches in the forest. Her hands grew rough. Her face grew thin. She lost weight she could not afford to lose. But she did not give up. Every day she walked into town to use the phone at Barrett's office. Every day she reviewed documents, signed papers, answered questions about her mother, her childhood, her reasons for coming to Carver Falls. The Wentworth attorneys were relentless. They subpoenaed records from hospitals where Vivian might have been born. They deposed elderly residents of Carver Falls who might have known Harriet. They hired a private investigator to dig into Vivian's background, looking for anything they could use against her. They found the foreclosure, the bankruptcy, the 8 years living in her son's spare room. They painted a picture of a desperate woman, a woman with nothing to lose, a woman who would do anything to escape her circumstances. They called her a fraud. They called her a con artist. They called her mentally unstable. And through all of it, Vivian sat in Barrett's office and answered every question with the same steady voice. The truth. She told them the truth over and over, in depositions, in hearings, in written statements. The truth was all she had, but sometimes the truth is not enough. Sometimes the truth needs proof. It was a Tuesday night in early December when Vivian found it. She had been going through the documents in the cellar again. All of them, every box, every folder, looking for something she might have missed. Something that could prove beyond any doubt that her mother's story was true. She had been at it for hours. Her eyes burned from reading by lamplight. Her back ached from sitting on the cold stone floor. She was about to give up when she noticed something. One of the boxes, the one labeled legal, had a false bottom. She had looked through that box a dozen times, had removed every document, examined every page, cataloged every piece of evidence. But she had never noticed that the bottom of the box sat higher than it should. She pressed on it. It moved. Her heart began to beat faster. She pried at the edges of the false bottom with her fingernails. It came loose, lifted away. Underneath was a single envelope, yellowed with age, sealed with wax, a name written on the front in handwriting she did not recognize, Sterling Wentworth, and a date, 1988. Vivian stared at it. This was not the letter Barrett had given her. That letter was still in her room unopened, waiting for the right moment. This was something else, something her mother had hidden even more carefully than everything else. She broke the seal. Inside was a letter, 2 pages, handwritten. She began to read. To whom it may concern, I am writing this letter in sound mind and of my own free will. I am 71 years old. I have been diagnosed with a heart condition that my doctors tell me will likely end my life within the next few years. Before I die, there is something I must put in writing, something I should have acknowledged long ago. In the year 1952, I entered into a relationship with a woman named Harriet Pembroke. She was not my wife. She was not of my social standing. She was a seamstress who worked at a shop in town. I loved her. I have never loved anyone the way I loved her. When she told me she was pregnant, I offered to provide for her. I offered to take this child and raise it as my own within my family. She refused both offers. She said she would not let her daughter grow up as someone's secret. I respected her decision. I have respected it every day since, but I could not abandon my daughter entirely. I established a trust in her name. I purchased land surrounding Harriet's cottage and placed it in Harriet's name to be held for our daughter. I have contributed to that trust every month for over 35 years. The child's name is Vivian. She is my daughter, my blood, my legacy. If she ever comes forward to claim what is rightfully hers, I ask that she be allowed to inherit in peace. I ask that my family respect her claim and not contest her right to the land, the trust, or her identity as my daughter. I have made mistakes in my life, many of them, but loving Harriet was not one of them. And Vivian is not a mistake. She is the best thing I ever did. I sign this letter freely and with full knowledge of what I am saying. Sterling James Wentworth, March 14th, 1988. Witnessed and notarized by Barrett Finch, senior attorney at law. Vivian read the letter 3 times. Then she set it down on the table and wept. Not from sadness, from something else. From the weight of being seen, being acknowledged, being claimed by a father who had never held her, never raised her, never been part of her life, but who had loved her anyway. He had loved her. He had protected her. He had written this letter 4 years before his death, knowing that someday she might need it, knowing that his family might try to take what he had given her. He had prepared for this moment, just like her mother had. 2 people who had loved her from a distance, who had built walls around her that she never knew existed, who had waited decades for her to need them. And here she was, finally needing them, finally finding them. Vivian wiped her eyes. She folded the letter carefully, placed it back in its envelope. Then she walked up the cellar stairs, put on her coat and boots, and walked through the snow to Barrett Finch's office. It was after 10 at night. The town was dark. The streets were empty, but there was a light on in Barrett's window. She knocked on the door. He answered in his shirt sleeves, glasses pushed up on his forehead. Mrs. Crestwood, is everything all right? Vivian held out the envelope. I found something, she said, in the cellar, under a false bottom in one of the boxes. Barrett took the envelope, looked at the handwriting on the front. His face went pale. Is this what I think it is? Read it, Vivian said. He did. When he finished, he looked up at her with something like wonder in his eyes. My father witnessed this, he said. He never told me. All these years, he never said a word. He was protecting it, protecting me, just like Sterling asked him to. Barrett shook his head slowly. This changes everything. I know. This letter is a sworn statement from Sterling Wentworth himself, written 4 years before his death. Notarized by a licensed attorney, it acknowledges you as his daughter. It affirms the trust. It asks that you be allowed to inherit in peace. He looked at Vivian. This destroys their entire case. Vivian nodded. That is what I thought. They cannot claim you forged the documents. They cannot claim your mother manipulated Sterling. This is his own handwriting, his own words, witnessed by my own father. Barrett set the letter down on his desk. Mrs. Crestwood, do you understand what this means? Tell me. It means we win. Not just the inheritance, the whole thing, their challenge, their motion for incompetency, all of it. This letter makes it impossible for them to continue. Vivian felt something loosen in her chest, something she had been carrying for weeks, maybe longer, maybe her whole life. What do we do now? She asked. Barrett picked up the letter again. Now we go to court, he said, and we show them what their father really thought of them. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. 3 weeks of preparation. 3 weeks of building a case that could not be broken. 3 weeks of organizing every document, every statement, every piece of evidence into an airtight presentation. Vivian spent those weeks in Barrett's office working alongside him. She was not a lawyer. She did not understand half the legal terminology he used, but she understood determination. She understood preparation. She understood the value of doing something right. She also understood for the first time in her life what it felt like to have someone fight alongside her. Barrett Finch was not her friend. He was her attorney. He was being paid from the trust account once it was unfrozen. Their relationship was professional, but he believed her. He believed in her case. And after a lifetime of being dismissed, that belief meant more than Vivian could express. The night before the hearing, she sat in the cottage alone. The fire crackled in the hearth. Snow fell softly outside the windows. The tin cup sat on the windowsill where it had always been. She picked it up. It was dented and tarnished. The kind of cup nobody would look at twice, but it had been her mother's. And her mother had drunk from it every morning for decades. Had held it in hands that had worked and suffered and built something from nothing. Vivian held it now. She thought about Harriet, about Sterling, about the love that had existed between them, brief and impossible and real. She thought about the child they had made together, the child Harriet had raised alone, the child Sterling had protected from a distance. She thought about herself, 72 years old, standing at the edge of something she had never imagined. Tomorrow she would walk into a courtroom and claim her name. Tomorrow she would face the family that wanted to erase her. Tomorrow everything would change. But tonight she was just a woman in a cottage holding a tin cup thinking about her mother. I came, she said softly to the empty room, just like you knew I would. The fire popped and settled. The snow continued to fall. And somewhere in the silence, Vivian felt her mother's presence. Not as a ghost, not as a memory, as something deeper, something that had been with her all along, waiting to be recognized. She set the cup back on the windowsill. Then she went to bed. Tomorrow would require everything she had, and she was ready. The morning of the hearing dawned cold and clear. Vivian dressed in the best clothes she had, the wool skirt, the cotton blouse, the cardigan that still smelled faintly of lavender. She brushed her hair and pinned it back the way her mother used to wear hers. She looked at herself in the mirror. An old woman looked back, but not a beaten one, not anymore. She walked into town through the snow. Her mother's boots left tracks in the white. The mountains rose around her, indifferent and eternal. Barrett met her at the courthouse steps. He was carrying a briefcase that looked heavier than it had 3 weeks ago. Every document, every letter, every piece of evidence they had gathered. And in the center of it all, protected by a plastic sleeve, was Sterling Wentworth's letter. Are you ready? Barrett asked. Vivian looked at the courthouse doors. I have been ready my whole life, she said. I just did not know it. They walked inside together. The courtroom was smaller than she had imagined. Wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lights, an American flag in the corner. The smell of old paper and floor polish. 3 attorneys sat at a long table on the left side of the room. Vivian recognized them from the descriptions Barrett had given her. Harrington, Cole, and Price. The senior partner was a man with silver hair and a face like carved stone. His associates were younger, sharper, with the hungry look of people who had something to prove. They did not look at Vivian when she entered. They did not acknowledge her existence. She was nothing to them, a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be removed. But they did not know what she carried. They did not know what was coming. The judge entered. Everyone rose. The hearing began. Harrington spoke first. He was smooth, confident, every word calculated for maximum impact. Your Honor, we are here today to request that this court reject the fraudulent claims of one Vivian Crestwood. Mrs. Crestwood appeared in this county 6 weeks ago with no identification, no resources, and no verifiable connection to the Pembroke estate. She broke into a sealed property. She produced documents of questionable authenticity, and she is now attempting to claim an inheritance worth nearly $500,000. He paused, let the number hang in the air. We submit that Mrs. Crestwood is either a con artist attempting to defraud one of this county's most respected families, or a mentally unstable individual who has convinced herself of a fantasy. Either way, her claims should be rejected and the estate should be placed under proper management. The judge, a gray-haired woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, made a note. Mr. Finch, your response. Barrett stood. Your Honor, everything Mr. Harrington just said is wrong. He opened his briefcase. Mrs. Crestwood is not a con artist. She is not mentally unstable. She is the biological daughter of Sterling Wentworth, acknowledged by him in his own handwriting in a letter written 4 years before his death. He held up the envelope. This letter was witnessed and notarized by my father, Barrett Finch Sr., who served as legal counsel to both Harriet Pembroke and Sterling Wentworth for over 40 years. It establishes beyond any doubt that Mrs. Crestwood is who she claims to be and that she is entitled to everything her mother left her. The courtroom went silent. Harrington's face did not change, but something shifted in his eyes, a flicker of uncertainty. May I see that document? The judge asked. Barrett walked forward and handed her the letter. She read it slowly. Her expression did not change. But when she finished, she looked up at the Wentworth attorneys with something that might have been contempt. Mr. Harrington, were you aware of this letter's existence? No, Your Honor, we were not. Interesting, because it appears to have been in the possession of the Finch law firm for over 30 years, a firm your clients have been dealing with throughout their attempts to acquire the Pembroke property. She set the letter down. I will need time to review this document and verify its authenticity, but I want to make something clear to all parties. She looked directly at Harrington. If this letter is genuine, and I have no reason to believe it is not, then your motion to declare Mrs. Crestwood mentally incompetent is not just without merit. It is offensive. You have attempted to use this court to disinherit a woman from her own father's legacy based on nothing but the inconvenience her existence poses to your clients. Harrington opened his mouth to respond. The judge held up her hand. Save it. I will issue my ruling within 72 hours. Until then, the trust remains frozen. But I strongly suggest your clients consider their position carefully. She struck her gavel. Court is adjourned. Vivian sat very still as people began to move around her. Barrett was gathering his papers. The Wentworth attorneys were conferring in angry whispers. The judge had already disappeared through a door behind the bench. But Vivian just sat there. She had done it. She had walked into that room and told the truth. She had faced the people who wanted to erase her. She had stood her ground, and she had not flinched. Not once. Barrett touched her shoulder. Mrs. Crestwood, we should go. Vivian looked up at him. Did we win? Barrett smiled. Not officially, not yet, but yes, we won. That letter destroyed their case. They have nothing left to stand on. Vivian nodded slowly. She stood up from her chair. Her legs were steady, her hands were calm. She walked out of the courtroom with her head held high. The Wentworth attorneys watched her go. She did not look at them. She did not need to. She knew who she was now. She was Vivian Crestwood, daughter of Harriet Pembroke, daughter of Sterling Wentworth, and no one was ever going to make her feel small again. The judge's ruling came 3 days later. Vivian was in the cottage when Barrett called. She had been cleaning the windows, wiping away decades of grime with a rag and a bucket of warm water. The morning light was coming through cleaner now, brighter, like the house itself was waking up after a long sleep. The phone rang in the kitchen, an old rotary phone that had sat silent on the wall for 34 years. Barrett had gotten the line reconnected the week before just in case. Vivian dried her hands on her apron and answered. It's over, Barrett said. His voice was different, lighter, like something heavy had been lifted from his shoulders. The judge ruled in your favor, on all counts. The challenge has been dismissed. The motion for incompetency has been denied. The trust is being released to your control as we speak. Vivian leaned against the wall. Her legs suddenly felt weak. What about the Wentworths? They have 30 days to appeal. But my sources tell me they won't. The letter destroyed their case. They have nothing left to argue. Vivian closed her eyes. So it's done. It's done. The land is yours. The trust is yours. The cottage is yours. Everything your mother left you is officially, legally, irrevocably yours. She did not speak. She could not speak. 72 years of being small, of being quiet, of accepting whatever crumbs the world decided to throw her way. And now this. Mrs. Crestwood. Barrett's voice was gentle. Are you still there? I'm here, she said. I needed a moment. Take all the time you need, you've earned it. She hung up the phone. Then she walked to the kitchen table and sat down. The same table where her mother had eaten breakfast every morning for decades. The same table where Harriet had written letters she never sent and kept secrets she never told. Vivian put her head in her hands, and for the first time in years she cried. Not the quiet tears she had learned to hide. Not the silent weeping she had done in bathrooms and bedrooms when no one was watching. Real tears, deep tears, the kind that come from somewhere so far down you forget they exist until they finally break free. She cried for her mother, for the woman who had loved her in silence, who had built a fortress around her without ever saying a word, who had died alone in this cottage waiting for a daughter who never came. She cried for Sterling, for the father she had never known, the man who had loved her from a distance, who had protected her with money and land and letters that waited decades to be read. She cried for herself, for the girl who had grown up believing she was nobody, for the woman who had spent 40 years in a marriage that asked everything and gave little, for the mother who had raised 3 children and ended up with nothing but $2 in a broken suitcase. She cried for all of it, and when the tears finally stopped, she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Clean, like rain had washed through her and carried away the dust of decades. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, got up from the table, walked to the window and looked out at the mountains. The snow was melting. The first hints of spring were pushing through the white, green shoots in the garden, buds on the trees, life returning after the long winter. She understood now. She understood what her mother had done. Harriet Pembroke had been a young woman with no power and no resources. She had fallen in love with a man she could never have. She had borne his child in secret, and she had faced a family that could have taken everything from her with a single word. She could have fought them, could have demanded recognition, could have dragged Sterling into court and forced him to acknowledge his daughter publicly. But she did not, because she knew she could not win that fight. Not then, not against the Wentworths with their money and their lawyers and their generations of power. So she did something else. She built a fortress, not out of stone and steel, out of patience, out of planning, out of love so fierce it was willing to wait decades for the moment it would be needed. She took the money Sterling offered and bought land. She saved every penny she could spare and put it in a trust. She sealed her cottage like a time capsule, preserving it for a future she would never see. And she waited. Not for herself. She knew she would be gone long before any of it mattered. She waited for Vivian, for the day the world would push her daughter to the very edge, for the moment when Vivian would need a place to go, a door that no one else could lock. That was not stubbornness. That was not paranoia. That was love. The kind of love that does not announce itself, that does not demand recognition or gratitude, that simply builds something in silence and trusts that someday, somehow, it will be found. And Vivian had found it, 54 years after leaving Carver Falls, 34 years after her mother's death. On the worst day of her life, when she had nothing but $2 and nowhere to go, she had found her way home. And her mother had been waiting for her all along. The weeks that followed were busy ones. There was paperwork to sign, accounts to transfer, lawyers to meet with, and documents to review. The machinery of inheritance ground slowly, but it ground forward. The trust account was released to Vivian's control. $412,000, more money than she had ever seen in her life, more money than she had ever imagined having. She did not touch it at first. It felt strange, like wearing someone else's clothes. She had spent so long having nothing that having something felt almost wrong. But the cottage needed work. 34 years of being sealed had preserved it remarkably well, but there were still things that needed fixing. The roof had a few leaks that the spring rains had revealed. The plumbing was old and temperamental. The electrical wiring was non-existent. Vivian hired local contractors. A roofer named Patterson, who had known Harriet back in the day. A plumber named Weiss, whose father had done work on the cottage decades ago. An electrician named Horvath, who was young and eager and charged fair prices. They all knew who she was now. The whole town knew. Word had spread about the trial, about the letter, about the woman who had walked out of nowhere and claimed the Wentworth legacy. Some people looked at her with suspicion. She was an outsider, a stranger who had upset the natural order of things. But others looked at her with something like respect. The mason who came to repoint the stone foundation was an older man named Caldwell. No relation to the lawyer, he had rough hands and a quiet voice and eyes that had seen a lot of years. When Vivian asked him for an estimate, he studied the foundation for a long time. Then he named a price that was about half what she had expected. "That seems low," she said. "Harriet Pembroke's daughter deserves a fair deal," he said. "Your mother was good to people in this town. Helped out when times were hard. Never asked for anything in return. Folks remember that." Vivian did not know what to say. She had not known that about her mother, had not known that Harriet, who had seemed so cold and distant, had been kind to others, had helped people, had been remembered. There was so much she had not known, so much she was only learning now. The work on the cottage took most of the winter. New roof, new plumbing, new wiring. A proper kitchen with a gas stove and a refrigerator that hummed quietly in the corner. Insulation in the walls to keep the heat in, storm windows to keep the wind out. The contractors came and went. The cottage filled with the sounds of hammers and nails and the smell of fresh-cut wood. Vivian worked alongside them when she could, handed them tools, made coffee, learned the names of their children and the stories of their lives. She was becoming part of the town. Not a Wentworth, not an outsider, just Vivian, Harriet's daughter, the woman in the cottage by the creek. By spring, the work was done. Vivian stood on the front porch and looked at what she had built. The cottage was solid now, warm, safe, the kind of place where a person could live out their days in peace. But she had more than she needed. 42 acres of land, most of it wild, fields going to seed, forests thick with undergrowth. The creek running through it all like a silver thread. She could have sold it. The Wentworths were not the only ones interested in the land. Developers had started calling, city people looking for vacation properties. Investors who saw dollar signs in the acreage. Vivian said no to all of them. Instead, she made a different choice. She leased 20 acres to a local farmer named Hutchins, a third-generation dairyman whose family had worked this land when it was still Wentworth property. He ran cattle on the fields and grew hay in the lower pastures. The rent was modest, but it was steady, and it kept the land working the way it was meant to. She donated 5 acres to the town. A parcel near the road, flat and sunny with good soil and easy access. She gave it to Carver Falls for a community garden, a place where people could grow their own food, where families could work together, where children could learn where vegetables came from. The garden opened in May. Vivian was there for the dedication. She stood at the edge of the crowd while the mayor made a speech and children ran between the raised beds and someone's dog got loose and had to be chased down. She did not speak. She did not need to. The garden spoke for itself. And somewhere she knew her mother was watching. The rest of the land she kept wild. The forest, the creek, the rocky outcroppings where wildflowers bloomed in summer. She walked through it on warm days, learning the paths, memorizing the trees, listening to the birds that had made their homes there for generations. Deer moved through the woods at dusk. She would see them from her porch, their brown shapes ghosting between the trunks, stopping to drink from the creek before disappearing into the shadows. Red-tailed hawks circled overhead in the afternoons, riding the thermals that rose from the warming earth. It was quiet out here, not the silence of emptiness, the quiet of peace. The call to Gerald came 3 months after the trial. Vivian had thought about it for weeks, had picked up the phone and put it down again a dozen times, had written scripts in her head, things she wanted to say, things she wanted him to hear. In the end, she said almost nothing. She dialed the number. It rang 3 times. Then his voice, familiar and distant. "Hello. Gerald, it's your mother." A pause. "Mom, is everything okay?" "I'm fine. I just wanted you to know where I am in case you wondered." Another pause, longer this time. Where are you? Carver Falls, New York, your grandmother's cottage. I'm living here now. The cottage, but that was sealed up. Nobody's been there in years. I know, I opened it. She could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, processing, trying to understand. How did you, what happened? After you left, we didn't know where you went. Marlene said you took a bus somewhere, but I took a bus here, to the place I should have come a long time ago. Silence. Gerald, I'm not calling to make you feel bad. I'm not calling to yell at you or blame you. I just wanted you to know I'm alive. I'm okay. I'm more than okay. That's, that's good, Mom. I'm glad. I know. More silence. She waited. He did not ask how she was surviving. Did not ask about the cottage or the land or the trust. Did not ask about the trial or the Wentworths or any of the things that had happened in the months since she had left his porch with $2 in her pocket. Maybe he did not know. Or maybe he did not want to know. It did not matter. Take care of yourself, Gerald, she said. You too, Mom. Goodbye. She hung up. 90 seconds. That was the whole conversation. A lifetime of silence between them, and 90 seconds was all they could manage. She did not feel angry. She did not feel sad. She felt something else, something that took her a while to name. Release. She had let him go. Not with hatred, not with forgiveness, just with acceptance. This was who he was. This was what their relationship had become. She could not change it. She could only decide how much of her heart to give it. She decided to give it very little. Some things could not be fixed. They could only be carried differently. And Vivian was done carrying weight that was not hers to bear. Her grandchildren were different. Gerald had 2 children, a boy and a girl. The boy was in college now, distant and busy with his own life. But the girl, Opal, was 17, almost 18. She had been in the house that morning, had heard the shouting, had watched from her bedroom window as her grandmother was pushed out the front door. She had done nothing. Vivian did not blame her. What could a teenager have done against her own parents? What could she have said that would have changed anything? But Opal blamed herself. The text came on a Wednesday evening in June. Vivian had learned to use the cell phone Barrett had insisted she get. It was simple, nothing fancy, but it let her send and receive messages and make calls when she needed to. The screen lit up with a notification. Grandma, are you okay? 3 words, from a number she did not recognize at first. She stared at it for a long time. Then she typed a reply. I'm better than okay. Come see for yourself. She did not expect an answer. She got one anyway. Opal showed up on a Saturday morning 3 weeks later. Vivian heard the car before she saw it, an engine straining up the gravel road, the crunch of tires on stone. She went to the front porch and watched. An old Honda Civic appeared around the bend. Rust on the fenders, a crack in the windshield, the kind of car a teenager drives when they are paying for it themselves. It stopped in front of the cottage, the engine cut off, the door opened, and there was Opal, taller than Vivian remembered, her hair longer, her face thinner. She looked tired, like she had driven a long way and slept very little. She had driven 6 hours. 6 hours in a car with bad shocks and no air conditioning. To see a grandmother she had watched being thrown out of her home. They stood there looking at each other. Vivian on the porch, Opal by the car, the distance between them filled with all the things that had happened and all the things that had not been said. Opal spoke first. I'm sorry, her voice cracked. I was there that morning. I heard everything. I saw you on the porch and I didn't do anything. I just stood at my window and watched. Tears were running down her face. I should have helped you. I should have said something. I should have done something. Vivian walked down the porch steps, across the yard, until she was standing right in front of her granddaughter. You were a child, she said. You were a child in your parents' house. There was nothing you could have done. But you're here now, that's what matters. And she opened her arms. Opal fell into them, and they stood there in front of the cottage, grandmother and granddaughter holding each other, while the summer breeze moved through the trees and the creek sang its endless song, and the mountains watched over them like patient giants who had seen everything and judged nothing. Opal cried. Vivian held her. No words were needed. None would have been enough. They went inside eventually. Vivian made lunch. Simple things from the garden. Tomatoes still warm from the sun. Basil she had planted in April and tended all through the spring. Bread she had baked that morning in the oven that had once been her mother's. They ate at the kitchen table. Opal was quiet at first, picking at her food, looking around the cottage with wide eyes. "This place is amazing," she said finally. "I didn't know Grandma Harriet lived like this." "She lived simply," Vivian said, "but she lived well." "How long has it been sealed up?" 34 years. "And everything was just here waiting." "Yes." Opal shook her head. "That's incredible. That's your great-grandmother. She was an incredible woman." After lunch, Vivian told her the story, all of it, from the beginning, the porch, the $2, the bus ride, the cottage, the letter on the mantle, the cellar, the box, the deeds, the trust, the birth certificate with Sterling Wentworth's name, the trial, the lawyers, the letter that had destroyed their case, the ruling. Opal listened without interrupting. She asked questions when Vivian paused. Good questions. Thoughtful ones. She wanted to understand. She wanted to know. By the time Vivian finished, the light had changed. The afternoon sun was slanting through the windows, painting golden rectangles on the wooden floor. "So you're rich now," Opal said. "I'm comfortable." $400,000 is more than comfortable, Grandma. Money is just money. It's what you do with it that matters. Opal nodded slowly. "Dad doesn't know about any of this, does he?" "I don't know what your father knows. I haven't told him." "He should know. He should know what you went through, what you found, what you built." Vivian shook her head. "Your father made his choice that morning. He stood in the hallway and let your mother push me out the door. He had a chance to speak, and he didn't. That's not something I can forget." "But maybe if he knew, Opal," Vivian's voice was gentle but firm, "some things can't be fixed. I've made my peace with that. Your father and I will never be close again. That's just the truth of it." Opal was quiet for a moment. "What about me? What about you? Are we, can we?" She trailed off. Vivian reached across the table and took her granddaughter's hand. "You drove 6 hours to see me. You're sitting at my table. You're eating food I grew with my own hands. What do you think?" Opal smiled. It was the first real smile Vivian had seen from her all day. "I think I want to come back." "Then come back. Really. This door is always open to you, always. No matter what happens with your parents. No matter what happens in your life. This place is yours too." Tears welled in Opal's eyes again. "Thank you, Grandma." "Don't thank me. Just come back." Opal left that evening. She had school the next day. Responsibilities. A life that was still being built. But she hugged Vivian at the gate before she got in the car. A long hug. The kind that says more than words ever could. "I'll be back," she said. "I know you will. Maybe for Thanksgiving. I'll have the guest room ready." Opal laughed. It was a good sound, young and hopeful. She got in the car, started the engine, waved through the cracked windshield, and drove away. Vivian watched until the car disappeared around the bend. Then she went back inside. The cottage felt different now, not emptier, fuller somehow. Like Opal's presence had left something behind, a warmth that lingered in the air. Vivian cleaned up the lunch dishes, wiped down the table, put the leftover bread in the bread box her mother had used for decades. She was not alone anymore. She had a granddaughter who wanted to know her. She had a home that was truly hers. She had a life that, against all odds, had become something worth living. And she meant it. Opal came back for Thanksgiving, and Christmas, and spring break. Each time she stayed a little longer, helped in the garden, learned to bake bread, walked the paths through the forest, and sat by the creek with her feet in the cold water. She brought friends sometimes. Other young people from school who wanted to see the cottage, to hear the story, to meet the woman who had walked through fire and come out the other side. Vivian told the story when they asked. She did not embellish it. She did not make herself the hero. She told it straight. The porch, the $2, the bus ride, the cellar, the letter, the love that had waited decades to be found. The young people listened with wide eyes. They asked questions. They said things like, "That's amazing," and "I can't believe it," and "Your grandmother must have really loved you." Yes, Vivian would say. She did. She really did. The seasons turned. Summer into fall, fall into winter, winter into spring. Vivian watched the land change around her, the leaves turning colors and falling away, the snow covering everything in white silence, the green returning when the cold finally broke. She worked in the garden when the weather allowed. Tomatoes and basil and peppers and beans, cucumbers and squash and pumpkins that grew so big she had to give them away to neighbors. She read on the porch in the evenings when the light was good, novels mostly. The kind of sweeping stories she had never had time for when she was raising children and keeping house and making herself invisible. She had time now. She had so much time. And she used it every day, every hour that the world gave her. She was 73 years old, then 74, then 75. The years passed like water over stones, slowly wearing away the rough edges, leaving something smooth and solid behind. She did not hear from Gerald again. She did not expect to. Some silences are permanent, some distances cannot be crossed. She had accepted that, made peace with it, moved on. But Opal kept coming. Every holiday, every school break, sometimes just random weekends when she needed to get away from the noise of the world. She brought her boyfriend once, a quiet young man named Marcus who shook Vivian's hand and said yes ma'am and no ma'am and helped chop wood without being asked. Vivian approved. She brought news of the family sometimes. Gerald was fine, Marlene was fine, they had renovated the kitchen, they were thinking about selling the house and moving somewhere smaller. Vivian listened without comment. It was information, nothing more. Her life was here now, in the cottage, on the land, in the town that had slowly, carefully accepted her as one of its own. The tin cup still sat on the windowsill. Vivian picked it up sometimes. In the morning, usually. When the light was new and the day was still full of possibility, she would hold it in her hands, turn it over. Feel the dents and scratches that decades of use had worn into the metal. Her mother had drunk from this cup. Every morning, for years upon years, had held it the same way Vivian held it now, had looked out the same window at the same mountains, had dreamed whatever dreams she had dreamed. Vivian did not know what those dreams were. Her mother had never told her, but she liked to think she understood them now. Dreams of security, of safety, of a place where no one could push you out the door. Dreams of love that outlasts the body that carries it. Dreams of a daughter who would someday understand. Vivian set the cup back on the windowsill. She did not say anything. She did not need to. Some things do not need words. They just need to be held. On a morning in late May, Vivian walked to the community garden. It was the 3rd anniversary of its opening. The town had planned a small celebration. Nothing fancy, just people gathering to share food and stories and the simple pleasure of being together. Vivian brought tomatoes from her greenhouse. Early ones started indoors when the snow was still on the ground, red and ripe and warm from the sun. She set them on a table with the other offerings, bread and pies and jars of honey from someone's bees. People greeted her as she walked through the crowd, nodded, smiled, said her name like it was something familiar. Vivian, just Vivian. Not Harriet's daughter, not Sterling's daughter, not Gerald's mother or Wallace's widow. Just herself. It had taken a long time to become just herself, but she had done it. The mayor made a short speech, thanked the volunteers who kept the garden running, mentioned the woman who had made it all possible. Vivian waved when people looked her way. She did not speak. She did not need to. Afterwards, she walked home along the creek. The water was high with spring melt, fast and cold and clear. She could see the stones on the bottom, smooth and round from centuries of being tumbled by the current. She thought about her mother, about Sterling, about the strange and winding path that had brought her here. She thought about the $2 in her pocket on that October afternoon, the broken suitcase on the porch, the bus ride through the darkening countryside, the sealed cottage waiting in the darkness, the letter on the mantel. I knew you would come. Her mother had known, had always known, and she had been right. Vivian reached the cottage as the sun was setting. The light was golden and thick, turning everything it touched into something precious. The stone walls of the cottage, the tin roof that no longer leaked, the garden beds full of growing things. She climbed the porch steps, opened the door, went inside. The cottage smelled like bread and wood smoke and lavender, like home. She put water on for tea, sat down at the kitchen table, looked around at the room she had come to know so well. Her mother's room. Her room now. The same walls, the same windows, the same view of the mountains that had watched over this place for millions of years. Everything was different. Everything was the same. The kettle began to whistle. Vivian poured the water, let the tea steep, carried the cup to the porch and sat in the rocking chair that had been her mother's. The mountains were turning purple in the fading light. The first stars were appearing in the east. The creek sang its endless song. Vivian rocked slowly. She thought about nothing. She thought about everything. She was 75 years old. She had been thrown out of her son's house with $2 in a broken suitcase. She had walked on bleeding feet to a place she had forgotten existed. She had found a letter in a cellar and a truth that had changed everything. She had fought a battle against people who wanted to erase her, and she had won. Not because she was strong, not because she was brave, because she had been loved. By a mother who built a fortress in silence. By a father who protected her from a distance. By a granddaughter who drove 6 hours to say she was sorry. Love had saved her, the kind of love that does not announce itself, that does not demand recognition, that simply builds something and waits. That was Harriet's gift. That was Sterling's gift. That was the gift Vivian would pass on to Opal and to whoever came after. Not money, not land, not a cottage full of preserved memories. Love. The kind that outlasts everything. The light faded. The stars came out. Vivian finished her tea and went inside. She washed the cup, dried it, set it on the counter next to the tin cup that had been her mother's. 2 cups now, side by side. She looked at them for a long moment. Then she went to bed. Tomorrow there would be gardening to do, bread to bake, letters to write, life to live. But tonight she would sleep, deep and dreamless, the way you sleep when you finally know where you belong. The next morning, Vivian woke before dawn. She lay in bed listening to the birds, the creek, the wind in the trees. Then she got up, made coffee, walked to the window. The mountains were there, the same mountains that had been there her whole life, the same mountains her mother had looked at every morning. She picked up the tin cup from the windowsill, held it in her hands, felt the weight of it, the realness of it. Her mother had held this cup, had drunk from it, had set it down and picked it back up 1,000 times. Now Vivian held it, and someday maybe Opal would hold it too. The chain unbroken, the love continuing, generation to generation, forever. Vivian set the cup back on the windowsill. She did not say anything. She did not need to. Some things do not need words. They just need to be held. Outside, the sun was rising over the mountains. A new day was beginning. And Vivian Crestwood, daughter of Harriet Pembroke, daughter of Sterling Wentworth, survivor of everything the world had thrown at her, walked out onto her porch to meet it.